What is good? So I had some thoughts. I did not, I didn't comment too much on this. I noticed that, Thomas Sheridan actually commented on, catching, Erica Kirk's, speech. And she says that, she forgives Tyler Robinson, right? And Thomas talked about pagan principle of vengeance. Now, here's why I actually think that forgiveness is warranted. Because let's just say that there are no conspiracy theories, right? Let's just say that how Thomas Sheridan thinks things went down is how things went down. If you understand what I mean by this, right? Thomas Sheridan, he kind of sees it rational enough. He's convinced enough that that this is a open and shut, mentally ill lone wolf. You see, for Tyler, this wasn't personal. I mean, he did it for love or whatever, but it wasn't personal for his lover. It was coming from a place, it was coming from the altruistic, virtuous place that we don't like because of the hypocrisy of the matter. We know that is a key factor. I also know that I am going in the wrong direction, and I gotta turn myself around. So you have here, what I agree with is that, you see, he was the patsy, but the patsy, what's his face? Oswald, right? Oswald was a patsy. He still had a gun, and he was still in the book depository. Okay? The patsy is always set up to be the guy and then doesn't get to do it. That's how the patsy works. He probably had the intent of taking him out, and he was driven to go there, to be there and do it in circumstances. And then once he was in position with his 98 Mauser Spring 30-06, right? So in my world where he's the patsy, you can forgive him because he was under mind control. In Thomas's world, where he did it, he's still mentally fucking ill. He did it in a universe of delusion. He shot Charlie Kirk, but he didn't shoot the person under the name Charlie Kirk. He meant to shoot the character, the persona, not the actual person, but his imagination as projected, as askewed by what you think for your way of life. His statements in agreeable accord with other conservatives means for your personal well-being. That seems pretty easy to explain for people, I think. Right? I think that makes a good amount of sense. So the forgiveness is coming from, you killed my husband, but you were wrong about my husband. Right? Because if that kid figures out who her husband's actual character was, what he would have said, because I'm sure he said some harmful things. He probably looked at some medical studies or something, gender dysphoria stuff, and then, that's him, when you go and you're talking about that, and I talk about that stuff too, it's like, it's incredibly insulting because, you're saying, no, this is who I am, and then somebody else is saying, no, this is your mental illness. And that is going to cause someone to spiral. If the person saying they have a mental illness wins the fucking argument, they're going to fucking spiral out, which is going to affirm that he not just won the argument, but he was true, but it's true, he was correct. And that for you personally, something needs to be done because you're about to hurt somebody, right? Losing an argument that affects you on a deep internal level, such as somebody rationalizing in an argument that you can't stand has merits that you'd be forced to face, that you have a mental illness, is the highest level of threat to a person's identity of self, aka ego. And if this kid had autism, autists have a compulsive hyperfocus that is part of their thing, which is why there's often like an ADD, ADHD factor that is just in the mix of being autistic. You give psychic driving to someone with autism, that's going to work 10 times more effective than what you see Jack Torrance go through in Kubrick's movie. So we're talking about effectively forgiving someone who did something because they had no agency, right? Now that doesn't mean that justice is not served, and justice and vengeance are pretty close friends, right? Vengeance is more like, if justice escapes, vengeance is on the chase. That's kind of how I see it. Right? Vengeance is for those that are afraid of accountability. So I say yes. I simply say yes. I can forgive Tyler Robinson for the intention and possible actual execution of assassinating Charles Kirk. By that merit, I can. And not because I had some God say that that's the way that it goes. I take things on a case-by-case basis. Right? Because even though vengeance may work for what your psyche needs, when it's on a certain level beyond what is our very personal, like, circumstances, right? You know, we don't live in a time where you can legally honor duel someone, right? Like we did in the 18th century, right? Into the 19th century. I challenge you to a duel, right? Pistols at dawn, yada, yada, yada. We don't live in that world anymore, right? Justice has to take its course, right? Because forgiveness or not, what difference does it make? Like, are you going to go personally hunt them down? Is is your husband going, like, or the next the next big man in your life, if you're a woman, and it's not feasible for you to personally distribute vengeance? Or maybe vengeance is really more in the man's wheelhouse, and maybe this is all just coming from something out of context. Because, dude, you gotta remember, in pagan times when we had our laws, there were no mentally ill people because we fucking euthanized them before they killed somebody. Because we fucking looked at the signs as when they were children. That's how brutal it was. We stopped doing that. And that is why we have people that are forgivable, that do horrible things, because of how we have chosen to risk mental illness in a free society. And we have gone through that, and we used to just call it sinners or living in sin, because you would have a mental illness compulsion to do to do as tempted instead of as what's good for you. And people didn't want to hear what was good for them or what was fucking deep, or whatever, so they just said, God fucking will throw you in hell. You'll be tormented by demons if you keep this up, right? And then, and then, like, you just become some fucking Satanist because you're just like, fuck you, you're ruining my fun. Or, well, you don't really become like, the Satanist is just somebody who is just like, quit bothering me. I'm doing just fine and I'm smarter than you, right? Some people, they aren't doing that. They're just ignoring the whole thing. They're kind of their own idea of fucking God in their head because of the forgiveness principle, right? And that's a person who's got their own, like that person's got all sorts of agency, right? I mean, one could say it's a kind of mental illness, but it's not the kind of mental illness that you don't have agency. Severe autism, I mean, you have, like, sometimes I feel like I'm the only person who knows about these fucking things. I love my buddy Bush Whisperer, but I'm on there, and for him it's not even fathomable that it's a realistic scenario that a lonely girl walks on a fucking bus or a train, car or whatever, can just sit down to a random incognito man on a bus, and because that person is probably has his own fucking mental illness and capable of horrible things, goes and does the horrible thing he's capable of on camera. And we're just like, it's like, no, I am outside of New York City. I've been nearly mugged in New York. I have seen how fights break out. I used to be in a band that had several members living on the Grand fucking Concourse, which, if you're from the fucking Bronx, you know what that fucking means. I'm not some fucking bitch. So he's just like, so like I just had to explain those quick things to him. It's like, buddy, listen, if you got something that tells me that this is fake, that's fine. I can believe that they faked the thing. I know all about the fakes. I've been looking at fakes and discerning them. But this scenario resonates because it's known to be true. If you look, I used to hear this on the 5 fucking o'clock news, right? But that's that's a real thing for vengeance with this guy. That should not, like, if you're talking about Charlie, was like, this guy was just standing right next to Charlie, and then out of fucking spite, he just fucking stabbed him. Just a knife gets past security because it's small, and that, that can fucking happen. If you wrap your knife up, and it's small, you wrap it up properly to bypass metal detectors and shit. You can get away with that. You're shivving. You're shanking. You're fucking shanking. Shawshanking. No redemption. Right? So that's just like, just because, that was just blind spite. That's just blind spite. And dude, like, if you don't know that fucking experience, it's like the way people don't fucking believe, up until the White House did it, that there was fucking Dutch farmers in South Africa. Bush is from South Africa, right? That were that were getting fucking genocided effectively, right? And that is beyond people's belief, especially with how we're conditioned to assume the best of everybody that isn't white in the whole fucking universe on principle. Which, if Loxism is Jewish supremacy, what's the word for white inferiority? What is it to look at white people in particular as the lesser race? What kind of racism do we call racism against just whites? Crackerism? I don't know. What do you fucking call it? You call it a joke, really, because other than the fact that a racist person may want to kill you, and the fact that maybe somebody has a system that wants to screw you over, if you know what you're doing and you're capable in your own fucking faculties, you're not really gonna have this trouble. Don't know why I just stayed behind these guys. So a guy like that, who is our juxtaposition example, right? So you have a gender identity-based crime, and you have a race-based crime, right? Race-based crime is even more impersonal. Two people that don't know nothing from nobody. And then the other one, where one guy only knows the public persona of another person and wants to kill that identity because he doesn't want to see that culture with a voice. It makes him feel very threatened and insecure, right? That people are coming after him because he loves the wrong people, and he's not, and because he's not happy with his body. And the problem with stuff stuff like what Turning Point USA was doing, what Charlie Kirk was doing. This is the problem with it, though, is that you're kind of fucking, you're having a champion wrestling a bunch of fucking rookies, right? You know, it's just like, you don't fucking like Charlie needs to have somebody on a much higher fucking level debating these causes for these people. But the problem is that there aren't anyone better. Everyone better has been a person with a pretty nasty attitude, and you know, had even less facts, figures, and statistics to throw out there, right? You know, there's a facts and figures game that goes into the argument, and that's part of the nature of debate, right? It's where you have something that was studied and observed that you see should have credibility as being done under useful scientific observation and data collection. And when you pick statistics, right, if one side of the aisle, whether they're conservative-minded or liberal-minded, is thinking on a raw human side, they're going to have a predisposition on you being a statistician, right? You know, because it's so impersonal. You know, this becomes the problem with emotional persons, people who think emotionally, which is going to be women and unstable men. And the question is, are you ignoring the statistics because it's a guy's thinking? You know, there has to be somebody who does some cold thinking that's shared with the compassion thinking. We need the women for the compassion thinking and men for the cold thinking, right? I mean, especially like if you women, you know, expect men to protect you, you're going to have to expect men to be capable of closing their hearts so they can hurt somebody as per who is a threat to the family. And that has to be understood under carefully considered scenarios, right? All sorts of context has to fall into place in time and space for you to get that internal cue of justified violence. There's a high standard for justified violence. And that high standard involves whether you are making threats, whether you are promoting violence, which is in the same psychic field, which is not protected speech. This is whether you're assaulting someone. You've squared up to them and targeted. Have you broadcasted your intent of various transgressions of harm? right? The idea of Erica's forgiveness is the idea of the message of that I understand that you don't understand, and I understand that you are threatened by the world as perceived, right? And that's why you don't have a Jimmy Kimmel anymore, because there's a certain gross aggregate of untruth and low character that is not going to be tolerated under contract, right? This isn't a free speech issue. This is a privileged speech issue. We have free speech in this country. That does not mean we're not allowed to have privileged speech as well. If you're paid money to speak, those speaking terms are a privilege, which can be revoked as per the value of the position offered. That you are at liberty to express yourself as long as you say the things in that time that you are paid to say. Then you can also do at your liberty other things. Otherwise, he wouldn't even need a writing team. He wouldn't even have to write himself. He could just get a script from whoever's selling what and just be an infomercial that might have jokes in it that are guaranteed to not land at all and be fucking cringy as hell. Which, I mean, Jimmy already fucking was. And was pretty much useless towards saying anything that matters in the national conversation for the left or the right. The left just wants the catharsis of a well-paid, reputable media person who says, screw that guy that you don't like. It says that every fucking night, so you go to bed feeling like one day that'll be enough to take away all of that bad man's political power until he is gone from office and from public life. Not really a thoughtful strategy, I'd say. We're also sitting in this deep concern, especially because Charlie Kirk was, I don't even know exactly what he said, but I don't have to know, I don't have to quote him exactly. I know the spirit of the intent behind the idea, and it's the irony through the looking glass, right? It's like you've got trans people or black people or whatnot that do not understand what Charlie Kirk's trying to say, or they do, but they're pretending that it's about race when it's really because they're socialist or communist, and it's about policies, and they do not care whether the socialist policy harms their own or not. They think the harm is inherent in the people they don't like being in charge of the policy. So it can't just be we need a socialist system. It's like, we need a socialist system where none of you white people are running anything anywhere for anybody. We know what's best because we're smart, scientifically atheist human fucking beings that realize that there isn't a big man with a beard living in the sky. And then they with your nonsense. I'll have to call Tim back. All right. So paganism under attack, right? Like a satanic panic, because they're going to use, paganism as the word, right? The big problem is that you have to actually identify as their definition of a pagan, right? Like they could waste all the time in the world taking a picture of me and being like, you see guys that dress like this, talk like him, act like him, yada yada yada. And then that's different, right? That's when they're trying to say that, my entire aesthetic is evil, right? Like, nobody sits there talking about, like, the trannies being like, your wig and your fucking skirt and your makeup and your piercings and your tattoos are all evil, right? Like, not on like a level where it's like there ought to be a law. They might be saying that in the sense of what they think it tells about the sin you're living in, right? And then, like, what happens is that people don't know how to fucking defend themselves. They don't know who they are. Because I guarantee you, somebody accused me of being a pagan, I would say, oh, that's very interesting. So you've accused me of a state of being. Okay, so what's the problem with my state of paganism, right? And then they'll say X, Y, and Z things. It's like, I'm sorry, how many Christians, how many people that you've got a million fucking, like, you've got all sorts of Christians that have been serial killers, murderers, rapists, porn stars. They're all wearing crosses. Sometimes they're wearing stars of fucking David. Right? And you say, oh, no, they're not Christian, but yet they are. Yet they are. They are not known to be exiled or excommunicated or banned from whatever fucking church they go to because forgiveness, right? Some churches will let you sin again and again and again, right? They'll do that because they just want to be there in hopes that eventually you start acting like Jesus. And then you tell them that they're Christians for going through the motions, even though they're just trying to practice a cleansing ritual and do not care to actually be a better man in their own right. And this folds into your fucking argument against the Christian, because you can use that to cast doubt on them. Because me as a pagan, I can speak, yeah, that's right, I'm a pagan. You don't have to pretend that you can trust me like you guys. You just have the rational sense of I, like everyone else, your or my gods created, were created men of free will, whom, despite anybody's best fucking judgment, can choose to sin one way or the other. And all you really need to know is a demonstration that I am a man and that I know right from wrong for myself, just like you do, except I don't feel guilt about knowing right from wrong like you do, because I don't subscribe to your Garden of Eden thing, right? I'm not butthurt about rejection from paradise. Not the paradise you're thinking of, anyway. But you're not ready for a biospherical regenesis conversation, are you, Mr. Christman? Barely understands what going a day without sin is like. Sometimes it's sins you ought not to do, and sometimes it's sins that ought not be sins. But either way, you're sinning every day. And, semi-shamily getting away with it. So, know who you are. Know how to explain yourself to people. And then always wonder about when it's worth it. Don't fucking walk into fucking situations of absolute lost cause people that want to fuck you over no matter what you say, because you certainly will get churches like that as much as you will get anything else. Because just like there are 50 bazillion churches, every pagan has their own fucking code, right? You can throw that in their face. It's just like, listen here, your church is retarded. This church doesn't give a shit. I mean, they give a shit that they wish I was Christian, but they don't give a shit because I am not a problem person as this pagan thing. Right? You know, you have 50 bazillion denominations with completely different attitudes and completely different ideas of which part of the Bible is the most moral to follow. So you can't lecture me, right? We ought to live in a time where it doesn't matter if satanic panic arises in the ignorant. The fucking person being accused of the panic ought to fucking know better by now. If they don't, well, they kind of deserve some of that fucking pain. Because if you don't know who you are, this is the only way to realize that you don't know who you are. I think we'll be fine. There are plenty of pagan voices out there. It's just that there hasn't been conversation. There hasn't been the debate, right? You're not going to find a fucking pagan on any of these fucking university campuses. I mean, you are, but you're not, really. And then it's a question of whether that pagan cares, wants to get involved. It depends, right? Me, under circumstances, I would have been interested. I would have been like, oh, okay, Charlie. Like, I would have brought my fucking A game on, Charlie. I would have been, I would have prepared. I would have prepared for, like, weeks if I was intending to do one of these things and get in line and whatever. I don't think it's allowed. I think you have to go to the school to do it. Meaning you can't do it as me, a 45-year-old man who would have so many obvious things. Right? This is my point with Charlie. It's just like the real piss off is that it looks like he's beating up kids because he's given these kids a taste of what it's going to be like arguing with adults in politics in the future coming from the alien side of the world, because you don't have any internal right-wingers to debate with. Here's an external right-winger to come out and debate you. Right? And he's embarrassing these kids at 31 years old with his Christian education and background. And being filled with church noise instead of university atheist noise. No longer even secular. And so the problem ultimately would be is that a guy like Charlie is going to end up basing his opinion on something like paganism based on what some fucking punk kid who doesn't know dick about squat thinks his pagan identity is here in America, who, if you saw my conversation with Thomas Sheridan, is in the context of having a very hard time having anything ancestrally directly connected, right? And the landscape itself is good enough, but also it's still not the same path, because you're still not looking at, ancient ancestral grave mounds. You're not looking at a long lost rune stone that was just left in the middle of the woods. It was just there's really very, very, very little of that. Everything is from the red man that was here, from the Native Americans, right? And other people that migrated of the Americas, aspects of the Iroquois Confederacy, so on and so forth. But you're not going to get anything else. So anyway, I'm going to get in. Thanks so much for tuning in.